the button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Um, Please use the Q&A feature for any presentation questions. You can choose to do this anonymously, and we will have about 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of the presentation. Please use the chat for general comments or technical issues. Chris will be monitoring the chat for any questions and comments. I'll help out with that as well. And then Chris will also be adding some links into the chat. One is for collaborative resource sharing. So if you think of a related reading, podcast, video, or something else, please share it with us in Calm's Resources Zotero or in the chat. And one of our volunteers will drop this information in the chat. The next link that you are going to see, which is also on the screen, is the link to our conference code of conduct. We have some reminders on the welcome screen here about that code of conduct as well. All right, I am going to go ahead and turn things over to our presenters, Lindley and Alissa. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Anita, and thank you all for joining us here for the final session of today, AI Under Duress. I'm Lindley Homol, so I am the head of Global Campus Outreach and Online Learning at Northeastern University Library, and Alissa Cilfone is my colleague and co-presenter, and she's the head of STEM and Entrepreneurship at Northeastern. We know that you've had several great sessions to choose from for this hour, so thank you for being here with us. We wanted to give you a quick and early overview of what we'll be talking about so you can confirm if this session is the best match for your needs in this time slot. So we'll start with our context about where we work, what we do, and why that matters for this presentation. Then Alissa will talk about the AI meeting series that she launched with her team, and I'll talk about the competencies framework approach I took with mine. Finally, we'll talk about what we learned from our respective approaches and how we're approaching ongoing AI learning and development a year later. So, while many of us have likely felt the pressure of adapting to or incorporating AI and its impact on higher education, we're aware that our particular context shaped our respective approaches. We share that context with you so you can compare it to your own and identify which, if any, approaches might work within your management situation or institutional context. We both work at Northeastern University, which is a large private R1 institution with comprehensive campuses in Boston, London, and Oakland, California. We also have graduate campuses in Arlington, Virginia, Charlotte, North Carolina, Miami, Portland, Maine, Seattle, Silicon Valley, Toronto, and Vancouver. Northeastern prides itself on being ahead of the curve and really dialed into what employers are seeking from graduates. Northeastern is also an AI forward institution that continually championed engaging with and leveraging AI even before we gained enterprise-wide access to Claude last April. In the library, we are two of the three department heads in our research and instruction department. As I mentioned, Alissa supervises the STEM and entrepreneurship team, and I supervise the global campus outreach and online learning group.
So a bit of context about the STEM team. Last summer, our STEM team had 7 librarians, all of whom are liaisons for either STEM or health sciences disciplines. Some of them had been actively involved in AI within their own research. Some had been paying attention to webinars since ChatGPT's kind of formal launch in 2023, and some had not yet significantly engaged with AI in any capacity. I will say that enthusiasm for AI as a whole was just decidedly not there. We understood as a team the impact and the context of how AI focused our institution was going to be, but I don't want the fact that our institution was AI forward to make any of you think that we have a team of AI evangelists in our group. We do have an AI teaching statement that Lindley and I created along with our colleague, Karen Vergarian, who's the head of our Arts, Social Sciences, and Humanities group, in late 2024, early 2025. This teaching statement helped set boundaries on how we as a R&I department would teach and engage with AI, focusing our efforts on teaching prompt generation and evaluation skills that could be applied across platforms.
So the Global Campus Outreach and Online Learning Team, which I'll just shorten to online learning throughout this presentation because it's a mouthful, is a smaller group with a different focus. So aside from me, there are 3 team members. 2 are scoped to online learning, where they develop and maintain tutorials to support and scaffold instruction across the network. And the third does outreach and generalist instruction in the network, as well as leading learning related accessibility efforts within the library. I am the only member of the team who currently has any subject liaison responsibilities. So last summer, I was the only one that was currently receiving teaching requests related to AI. One member of the team had developed an AI workshop, so had some experience teaching tools and strategies. Another had no experience with AI in the classroom, and the third was newly hired to our department, so their experience was largely unknown. Some members of my group, due to their lack of exposure to classroom teaching, were unlikely to develop AI literacies for instruction on their own, yet I feared them lacking skills that could be needed if tutorials or programming related to AI were requested, or if in future roles they might have different scoping. So, for these reasons, I decided that we needed a practical, focused, team wide approach to addressing generative AI in teaching contexts.
So I'll kick us off with a quick overview of our discussion series, our 9 meeting discussion series on AI. And so, yes, 9 meetings. AI came onto our radar in 2023, and with increasing urgency throughout the 2024 year. A lot of folks within STEM were discussing it with me during one-on-ones, and none of us quite knew how to tackle it. Our workload was full, not unlike how I think probably many of you feel. And it was very hard to prioritize something like this because it was clear that once you started, the work would only snowball. After Claude was added to our institution in 2025, it created the urgency that we really needed to prioritize this. My goal as a manager was for all of the liaisons to feel confident addressing AI questions from faculty or students when they were put on the spot inevitably during the fall semester. And throughout my conversations with folks in one-on-ones, I noticed that the things that they were talking about were what are other people thinking, not the how do I logistical questions themselves. So I suspected that the best path forward was for all of us to get comfortable talking about AI, thinking that if we're comfortable talking about it amongst ourselves, that it can only help us be confident talking about it amongst others, like our faculty, students, et cetera, during the fall. So on the screen now, you're seeing a list of each of the topics for each of the 9 meetings that we had, along with the pacing for them. As you can see, none of these are really logistical or how-to meetings. All of the items themselves are really focused on group discussion and level setting across our team, focused on bringing individual knowledge into basically collective team knowledge, which really facilitated this ultimate goal of getting us all comfortable talking about AI as a whole. We opened our series with a general share out meeting to break the ice, and then moved to probably the driest meeting I will ever run, in which we looked at and discussed Northeastern's existing AI policies. From there, we again discussed topics where everyone had something in common, whether it was the tool or a soft skill that was related to AI in the classroom. We also had a couple meetings where we tackled new things together, like deep research, which at the time had really just started to be released, and that many of us had put into a deal with it later box. Throughout all of these meetings, I was keeping track of the use cases that we were discussing that we found either effective or ineffective, and then also at the same time acceptable or unacceptable, which I then plotted into a chart. And review of that chart and discussion of it became our final meeting on July 28th. So the chart itself, I have pictured up here. The font is very small intentionally because this is from July 2025. There have been significant and large technological changes then, which may change the assessment of what folks considered effective and acceptable. But what I wanted to highlight here on this as we were having our conversation our conversations over time is that we were all surprised, especially being decidedly uncertain on AI as a whole, how many use cases fell into the quadrant that was effective and acceptable, which is that upper right hand corner. What I take away from this now is not necessarily that, like, oh, wow, there are so many great uses of AI. What I take away from this as a manager is that it reflects the overall tone in our meeting series. It was a meeting series that was, intentionally focused on exploration without judgment. And I'm very grateful for that, considering both how polarizing and contentious the topic can be, but also how long this meeting series is. It's no joke to put people through 9 meetings about AI. So at the end of the meeting series, I shared a survey with the team and I requested their most honest feedback, as I let them know upfront that I intended to try to share these survey results with the larger community. 6 out of 7 team members responded with an average rating of 8.75 out of 10 for value of the series. The most useful sessions were tied between our discussions on deep research and the NU policies, both of which were sessions where we were as a team working through something new together. Our least useful session was the student attitudes session, and this was due to the fact that there was just both very little concrete information on student attitudes at Northeastern at the time, and also how quickly it had been and still is changing on a regular basis. It was very difficult to kind of put a pin in what is a student attitude at Northeastern towards AI. Importantly, 6 out of 6 folks would recommend this type of discussion series to other academic librarians. So if you're thinking about this and thinking that maybe it's a good fit for you, I feel like it's a very strong recommendation from staff to say that they would actually they would inflict this on other people as well. So a couple of keys that I think helped make it successful. The first was to make it fun. And actually, even before I talk about that, I do want to mention one other thing that I think helped our team get this right. Our team has been working together for a little while. Our newest team addition was in May 2023, so 2 years before our start of May 2025. This really made an impact because everybody knew each other. We knew our communication styles. We knew how we had been working together. There was kind of a foundational layer of trust that I think really made an impact on our overall success with this meeting series. The other thing I did very intentionally was try to introduce some lighthearted elements to this. We have a colleague at Northeastern who uses the phrase "eat your veggies" to describe any work that we would really prefer not to do, but know that we should. And thus, this whole series actually became vegetable themed. So, to encourage immediate participation and engagement, we started each meeting with a different vegetable themed round robin question. It brought a bit of joy and surprisingly some controversial opinions right to the beginning of the meeting, which helped set the tone for what was to come. And I do think that a lot of the positive energy that existed in the room around a difficult topic like AI did flow from these icebreakers. My other key to success was to make it easy to participate. I organized this meeting series within an inch of its life intentionally. This was an opportunity for me as a manager to show by example that this mattered to me and that I was going to put in the time and effort to make this meeting series run as smoothly as I could. And I think that helped everyone else continue to take it seriously too, especially at the points in which we were all maybe feeling a little bit tired and a little bit fatigued. For me, what this looked like was sending out, things like pre-meeting emails with agendas, discussion questions, and if there was any pre-reading ahead of time, sending that out as well. I tried to keep the tone in all of my messaging and emails light and friendly, and repeatedly kept an emphasis that this was going to be a group learning space and as much of a safe space as we could make it for each other. I also acknowledged very frequently that we were sick of thinking about and talking about AI. As Lindley mentioned, we were at a very AI forward institution. We'd been hearing about this in some capacity from admins and university folks since 2023. And so this is 2 years into kind of hearing about this all the time that we took on this challenge of a very large meeting series. So my work for this series in case you're getting to the point in the presentation where you're thinking, maybe this is a fit for me, but what does it mean for me in terms of time as a manager? This is what I ultimately did for the series myself. It was not an insignificant amount of time by any means, but it was something that I was able to find time to squeeze in through careful calendaring. So for me, what this looked like was initially finding times to meet and then creating calendar invites. If you had an eagle eye, you will have spotted that the dates that were at the beginning of this are very sporadic. Some of them are twice a week. Some of times there's a 2-week break. That is because we were trying to coordinate the calendars of 8 people. And so finding a single meeting time on a weekly basis was just not going to work. And so we went for the good enough strategy and tried to find times where the vast majority of people could meet, or it seemed like people had the most availability. After I had created the meeting invites was when I started brainstorming and organizing the topics for the meetings themselves. Once I had the brainstormed list, that's when I sent it to the full team, and then eventually updated all of the individual calendar invites with what that meeting topic was going to be. I did my meeting planning only about 1 to 2 weeks in advance before each meeting so that I could adapt it based on previous discussions. And especially as I was getting a sense for a feel and flow of how the team really seemed to bring their best selves to the meeting. After planning, I would update the calendar invites with the agenda, the pre-work, and the discussion questions so that it was available in the calendar whenever somebody clicked on the calendar invite. And I also sent out a duplicative email with the same information. This is because we have some people on my team who work primarily out of their calendar and some people who work primarily out of their inbox. And I wanted to make sure, again, thinking about making this easy for people to participate, that the information was wherever they needed it to be. So now I'll hand it over to Lindley to talk about her group's approach.
Thanks, Alyssa. So I took a different approach with my group considering our size, the relatively scoped range of potential requests that we would get related to AI, and our varying levels of expertise and exposure. So I decided to go with a competency-based approach, scoped to teaching and learning for tutorials or workshops, as these are the main instructional offerings that my group participates in. I was ultimately trying to make AI less squishy for my team, setting clear expectations of what each member should know or be able to do, as the advice that we had been getting to explore or play with AI could feel alternately overwhelming or just not particularly helpful. I had been looking for guidance to come from our university or professional organizations, but it did not exist in the summer of 2025 when my team really needed it. So I attempted to put some structure around AI on my own. When my group had been faced with the similarly large task of preparing all library instructional staff for online learning during the pandemic, I had developed a list of competencies for instructors that helped librarians quickly evaluate their skills and seek training or coaching for the areas in which they needed assistance. I thought a similar approach could help shape our efforts in generative AI, and I started with my own experiences as the liaison to Northeastern's Graduate School of Education. So I started identifying competencies based on the teaching requests that I had received and the foundational skills or knowledge I had needed to be able to teach those sessions. To ensure that I was getting a more balanced perspective, I then reviewed LibGuides from other institutions to see how they were addressing AI to identify any areas I might have missed. Once I had that initial list, I brought it to my team to see if they had any other ideas of areas of focus or felt that any of the current competencies were out of scope. With one minor edit to the original list, this document was put in place as a framework for our summer 2025 meetings. So there's a link in the slides that I think will also be getting dropped into the chat that will take you to the overall competencies document. But the four primary areas of the framework were explain how generative AI works, which included things like explaining how AI models are trained and why they're prone to errors. The second competency focused around AI's weaknesses and dangers, both specific weaknesses of the tools we had licensed for use at Northeastern, as well as more global weaknesses and dangers in areas like privacy, copyright, and sycophancy. In the third category of using generative AI effectively, skills like effective prompting and use cases for our licensed tools were all addressed. And finally, we addressed how to effectively evaluate AI for a use case, as well as evaluate its output. So to go a little more in depth on each of these, in that first category of explaining how Gen AI works, we focused both on trying to explain some of the differences between the library licensed tools like Scopus and Cite versus the enterprise tools like Claude, turning the prompts in Scopus and Cite into output, and then more generally explaining how large language models are trained and how that can lead them to be error prone. In terms of describing generative AI's weaknesses and dangers, we looked at several different contexts, including the ethical, environmental, legal, educational, and social, and then looked at specific examples of some of the weaknesses of the tools that Northeastern had licensed in particular. When looking at using generative AI effectively, we looked at things like generating efficient and neutral prompts, describing where and how AI might be able to assist in the research process, as well as where it shouldn't be used, why, and some alternatives for those pieces of the process. Looking at methods for improving generative AI's output, looking at some strategies for overcoming its limitations like confirmation bias or uneven source quality, and then determining how applicable AI could be for a use case, weighing it against things like its environmental impact and fitness for task. And finally, looking at evaluating the output, we were looking at ways that AI could be used to fact check AI, using lateral reading strategies to evaluate its output, looking at some other limitations like ephemerality and bias, looking specifically at how to determine the credibility of a journal surfaced in Cite, as that had been something that was of concern to some faculty, and then explaining the importance of reading sources surfaced from generative AI. So after we had our finalized list of competencies, I spent the month of June asking my team to take small pre-tests that rated their comfort level teaching each concept or skill, focusing on one of the four categories each week. Then in our weekly team meetings in July and August, we would focus on the competencies that the group had the least comfort or experience with in a comfortable low stakes environment. We had worked through a fair number of competencies by the end of the summer, but my group was pretty tired of all AI all the time. So I spaced out the remaining areas to span the entire fall semester, which equated to a roughly bi-weekly cadence for our AI discussions. When my team was taking the pretests, I asked them to rate their comfort level with each competency on the following scale. I could teach this to the rest of our unit. I feel comfortable explaining this to a class. I would like a refresher on this topic, or I can't do this yet. Nearly every competency was identified as one in which at least one team member wanted a refresher or couldn't do it yet. The survey wasn't anonymous because I wanted to make sure that I had responses from everyone and could follow up with anyone who hadn't completed it. But I assumed that because names were attached, not everyone might feel comfortable saying they couldn't do something. I therefore assumed that a fair number of refresher responses might overestimate capability, so I elected to address all of the competencies that had been selected as either of the bottom two responses from any single team member. If anyone selected the top category, I had their name as someone who could kick off or partially lead that week's discussion. This calendar should give you a sense of how I broke down the competencies over the summer meeting series. There was a lot in that first meeting, but it was all highly related content that would have felt repetitive if broken up over a month of meetings. Group members brought readings and trainings that they had attended to this meeting to help us put together our elevator pitch for LLM training and AI errors, which you can see kind of noted in the document that was shared in the chat. In our second meeting, we built on our general description of enterprise AI tools by talking through some of their known weaknesses so that we could help point students or faculty to a specific tool given an information need. The remaining meetings were very discussion heavy as they focused on the contexts AI was impacting, and all group members would bring links to articles or other readings they had engaged with on the topic. While we had really good discussions on these topics, most of the news in each of these areas was pretty bleak, so I completely understood my group's feeling of being a bit burned out on AI and wanting to space out our remaining discussions and training. We worked through the remaining competencies by the end of the fall semester, and I again asked my team members to rate their competency with each item on the same scale as the pretest. I did ask each team member to be very honest in their assessment of their abilities because while I could understand folks not wanting to go through any additional training or discussion on these topics, I was going to consider them responsible for each of these capabilities if they expressed that no additional training was needed. On the post-test results, two team members each expressed a single competency that they couldn't yet teach, which didn't overlap. Given the significant improvement from the pretest, I didn't feel that we needed to go over these two concepts as a whole team again and advised that they review these competencies in their one-on-one check-in meetings. Given the pace of AI, several new tools and capabilities had emerged during the course of our training that would likely need to be added to our competency document. The team requested taking a month or two off from learning anything in depth, but agreed to a monthly AI focused meeting where we could bring updates from what we were reading, learning, or trying related to Gen AI and our teaching practices.
So now we wanted to offer a couple of takeaways and just kind of the what happened next in the year since this has, or 9 months, I suppose, since this series has ended for both of us. So for the STEM team, I'll go first. My first takeaway is that this worked really well with the original STEM team, but it immediately created a significant gap when new team members were added in August. The entrepreneurship team rejoined our group after several years reporting somewhere else within the library. So they had missed a significant team building experience, and it was a very recent team building experience as well. They also missed a significant amount of knowledge development, not necessarily just in the how-tos of AI, but in the comfort of discussing it with the team and just a general shared knowledge that we had created in talking about use cases, in talking about all of the different things that were a part of the series. I do still notice this gap today, many months after the integration. And now, as a manager, I do find myself wondering how I can get them caught up, so to speak, with the rest of the team, given that there's not a good way for me to recreate this series again.
As I noted before, timing of any extended training can be difficult. Talking about AI weekly proves too much for my team, but expanding out the training over 6 months meant that some significant new developments had emerged by the time we completed our initial list. Depending on your team and their feelings about AI, you might find more success with one or more focused retreat style gatherings. Similar to pacing, I would consider the balance between foundational content and understanding and tool specific skills. Again, depending on the focus of your team, you might be more likely to get questions about specific tools, but tool capability changes quickly, and you often need a foundational understanding of how that tool is put together to be able to confidently teach the skills that patrons may ask about. Whenever possible, I would try to pivot to one of my team members to kick off our discussions when they had indicated experience in a particular competency. It helps team members own and share their expertise and help to keep the series from feeling like such a top-down initiative.
In terms of what happened next for the STEM group, kind of naturally conversations continued about topics from the meeting series throughout our weekly meeting in the fall semester. The team continued to engage and discuss more confidently in AI tools within our collection, as well as within their individual disciplines. This year, we as a team, including the entrepreneurship team, are going to be pivoting our time towards a more hands-on learning approach with AI tools, encouraging a bit more of application of what we're learning rather than the more exclusive engagement with webinars that we had been seeing previously. I will also add that the overall sentiment of AI within the STEM group or STEM and E group has been a little bit more, it's been a little bit less pronounced than it had been previously as Claude has gotten kind of integrated and accepted into our AI tools, and as we're starting to see more engagement with other AI tools such as Scopus AI.
With how rapidly AI is changing, keeping up with its developments often feels like a task that only AI can do. So, to help focus and scope the ongoing AI professional development in my group, we've moved to that monthly check-in related to AI updates. And in order to help further scope that work, we assigned specific areas of focus for AI that were aligned with the roles and responsibilities on my team. So looking at things like accessibility, learning design, and online teaching as they relate to AI. In our monthly check-in, each team member is expected to bring back what they've read, watched, listened to, or learned in their assigned area to share with the group. So this helps us learn from each other while not duplicating our investigative efforts too much.
So with that, I'd like to say thank you for joining us today. We are very happy to answer any questions now or in the future. You can see our emails up on the screen. Please feel free to reach out, and we look forward to hearing some questions.
All right, thank you so much, Lindley and Alissa. We will go ahead and take our time for questions now. I've got a handful already in the Q&A, but please feel free to continue adding those. We'll answer them as they come in. So the first question is about the staffing for the online learning team. Are all staff members degree-holding librarians? And the question asker says, we have instructional designers in our overall division, but they are not under the library. Just curious.
Yes, everyone on my team is a degree holding librarian. We also have instructional designers within the larger university, but the ones on my team are just focused on library tutorials and library instruction.
Great. Okay, question for Alissa. Did you get some, any, or a lot of pushback from your team on the number of sessions, the content, etc.? Did everyone participate or was there attrition? And did they agree with your goal of being able to address questions before embarking?
Ooh, lots of great questions in
And
here.
a long questions, if you need me to repeat any, let me know.
So in terms of pushback from the team on the number of sessions, I think I would say surprisingly no, at least not necessarily expressed to me directly. And I think this is where that large layer of trust that existed amongst not just the team members, but also between myself and the team members made a big difference. I think there was a general sense of trust that if there was a reason to cancel, that I would and that we were trying to do the best that we could with the information that we had and what we thought we needed to learn. In terms of the other questions, sorry, I just lost it in the Q&A. In terms of the content, I think overall folks were happy with the content. The one session that I do think in hindsight I would have changed, there are two sessions I think in hindsight I would have changed. One was around student attitudes, and the other one was around actually faculty communication. For both of those, we just didn't have enough information to share to justify the full meeting time. So I do think both of those ended probably a little early, somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes. Participation, I didn't see any real attrition throughout the meeting series. I think some of that, again, is we're a relatively small team. We knew that there was an expectation for all of us to be there when we could. We did have at least one person probably miss most of the meetings just due to summer vacation schedules. We were off, people were out, and so there was an expectation set ahead of time of if you miss a meeting and you want to catch up, talk to your colleagues and use it as an opportunity for connection. And yes, I do think folks generally agreed with the goal of being able to address questions before embarking, mostly because that was a fear that I think a lot of people had. You're in a live class session and somebody throws up their hand and asks a curveball. Every teaching instruction librarian has had that scenario occur. And I think it was especially unsettling to be thinking about that with a whole new set of resources beyond just the existing things that we already had to contend with.
All right. Could you all share more about how you developed the AI teaching statement and what it entails?
So I did pop the link into the chat so folks can see that it's published on our website. And Alissa, please correct me anywhere where I'm misremembering. But when we were looking at this, we were really trying to create some space and boundaries for our staff who were getting varying requests related to AI and weren't really sure how far our instruction needed to go, how much we should really expect the classroom instructor to cover. And at that point, we didn't have enterprise access to AI tools. So it was also varying expectations of ChatGPT, Claude, and trying to really manage those. So Alissa, me, and Karen, our other co-department head, really sat down to try to figure out what we could do and focus on the transferable skills. So really focusing on things like prompting and evaluation that would happen across tools rather than on the tools themselves. We tried to make this a very collaborative process with our department by bringing the statement to them, working through it and kind of testing it out and retooling it with feedback. And like I said, Alyssa, correct me anything I missed.
No, an excellent summary. I think things that made this very helpful for us was the continual feedback that we were getting from the department as we were developing the process. We had, and Lindley, Karen, and I had an offline document that we started working on initially that helped us frame out what we were looking for through a series of 3 or 4 questions. And so we were able to point back as we were having conversations with the department of why we were drawing a boundary, what the impact of that boundary could be, and then, yeah, hopefully seeing ways to apply that. We did this early on, as Lindley said, before we had access to Claude, or even other tools, because we could see the direction the institution was going, and we were worried about the impact on workload.
Sorry. The next question is, can you talk a bit more about what support, if any, you were receiving from your senior leadership team and how you worked through that?
So I'll answer for myself. I think it may be a similar answer for both Lindley and I. Both of us report into the same associate dean. And so he was aware of the work that we were doing around this and was generally supportive. But as you can imagine, at a large institution, when you have a fast moving target like something like AI, there was a lot of different initiatives happening at once. So we generally, I guess the best way to describe it was supportive, but not necessarily involved. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with Alyssa. I think what I was finding last summer was I was getting kind of pulled into meetings with our supervisor and others high up at the institution that were focused on how AI was going to be addressed campus wide, like in the curriculum, what role the library could play. There was a lot of talk about offering open workshops. And so that did help to inform the approach I took with my team of being able to teach workshops related to AI for a generalist audience because the expectation was that we might have to do those in the fall. That's not something that ended up happening at any large scale, but was definitely something I wanted to prepare my team for. And the university or the library administration was, supportive of any approach we wanted to take with our teams, but we didn't get a lot of direction about what role we should take there.
Thank you. Are you all addressing student pushback to AI, even though the institution is pushing it? And the question asker said they remember Northeastern had an early headline about a student potentially suing because of faculty using AI to grade or something along those lines.
Yeah, so I think this has actually been really helpful for us with our teaching statement as well, is that while our institution is very AI forward, I referenced this earlier, we don't have folks on our team who I would say are like AI evangelists. What we are looking for and what our goal is to think about how it can be used and if it should be used when we're thinking about our teaching. So a lot of the types of teaching, which we didn't necessarily talk about here, is about, or a lot of the ways people have been evolving their teaching, which we didn't necessarily talk about here, has been about thinking about, is there an appropriate spot to put it and should I put it there? And that's often in careful consultation with the faculty member when we're teaching in class. I think there's also been some interest, some interesting things that have come out at least internally with Northeastern in terms of like student usage of Claude, which I think probably seems like it was initially lower than the institution expected, but also references some of those things that like this, while it's being pushed as a large institutional initiative, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody at the institution is either all in, including students, or thinks of this as some sort of miracle solution. Lindley, feel free to jump in and add.
Yeah, I think what I've seen is that my group is really addressing AI when an instructor or faculty member is requesting that to happen. Otherwise, it's not something that we're really bringing up or highlighting in sort of a general orientation. But if we get a request to deliver an open workshop or what I've been requested from the doctoral education program, then I'm incorporating it in along with kind of the traditional information literacy and kind of weaving it in rather than hoping to, just have it off set to the side, but really, where does this make sense in your research journey? How does it pair with some of the other tools that we have so that students can engage with it or not, depending on their preference, but not trying to, actively push it at them.
I am going to jump down to the bottom because I think it's sort of related. So you mentioned the team members not all being necessarily AI evangelists, but were there any team members who were ethically opposed to using the AI in general? And if that was the case, how you were able to engage them in the process and keep them involved?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I think we had varying ranges. I would say if I was to put a scale of like 0 to 10 on it, 0 being a unwilling to engage, we probably had a handful of folks who fell in the like 3 to 5 scale as opposed to the 0 to 1 scale, which made a very big difference in terms of willingness to engage. It also made a significant impact that Claude had been added at the institutional level. I do not think our team would have addressed this at the timing or the pacing that we did if Claude hadn't been added and kind of unleashed on all of us and on the university, so to speak. I think that created the pressure, frankly, that was needed for us to have the conversation and to not necessarily move past some of those ethical situations, but it created the sense of urgency that meant that even if we had ethical concerns, we still were going to have to deal with it. And we were still going to have to figure out how we as a team were going to talk about it. And that was one of the reasons that the series that I did really focused on getting us all comfortable with talking about this with each other so that we could work through some of those trickier conversations and more difficult challenges.
Yeah, I think my group was similar in that I didn't have anyone that was really pro AI on my team, but I didn't have anyone that outright refused to use it. And when I was trying to structure the competencies, I tried to make sure that there were multiple ones you could do without having to actively use AI if you really wanted to limit your personal use of it. So a lot of it you could do reading about the tool or watching something about the tool rather than having to actively use it yourself so that folks didn't feel that they had to be in the AI tools any more than they wanted to. Um, and I think that my team was pretty pragmatic and realized that it was something that if they were, asked to teach about it, that they could, and they could feel comfortable discussing and teaching both some of the benefits as well as some of the cautions and dangers. And for my group, it helped that we were working on an AI tutorial series over the summer too. So folks kind of really needed to actively engage with some of the things that we were talking about in our meetings to put those together. So it kind of gave them that additional pressure of I need to know what I'm talking about here if I'm trying to teach this to students in an asynchronous tutorial.
Thank you. I'm going to put together two kind of related questions here. How were you able to incorporate citations into library lit instruction? And then also, how did you handle Gen AI and copyrighted materials?
So in terms of citations, and please correct me if I'm interpreting this question the wrong way, but we did put a tutorial together about citing and AI that sort of tackled it from two aspects. One was, can AI create my citations for me? What things can it do well? What things can it not? And what do I need to cite from AI if I'm using that in my research process? And so that's how we tackled that piece of the citation, at least on my group. And in terms of the Gen AI and copyrighted materials, that's something that another one of the departments in the library has really been looking at. Our sort of electronic resources group, they've been going back through all of our licenses to see which of our vendors actually allow sort of any engagement with their materials with AI and which don't. And so we've been kind of adding that to our databases list and sort of informing folks when we get those questions of you need to check the licenses because even if something might be okay to use under copyright, that doesn't mean it's okay to use if it's under our license, because that sort of supersedes that. And yeah, Alyssa, correct me if I've missed anything.
No, I think these are two good questions, especially the Gen AI and copyright one, because that was a space that we didn't address during the STEM meeting series, in part because we just didn't have a lot of information. This has been a huge moving target over the last year. And at the time, we didn't have a ton of knowledge at our level of like what licensing agreements were, what they were going to allow, what was okay or not okay to put into our university's Claude, knowing that they had been calling it a walled garden for a long time. So we are still getting, in fact, like just this past week, we got an email with some additional information from our university's OGC on like, what does copyright mean for us in our context at Northeastern as it relates to Gen AI? And so this has very much been a like a moving target changing situation. Yeah.
Great. How many hours did it take in total to complete those competency sessions? Do you feel like it could be accomplished in like a single day long retreat or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think based on the 8 meetings we had over the summer and basically half of a semester, that would be about 16 45-minute meetings or so. I will say that not everyone took the entire 45 minutes. Some of them we had a fairly quick discussion. And it may depend on how much time you wanted to devote to or engage with some of the things like the different contexts. But it would probably be a bit much for a day-long retreat if you wanted to do all of them. But I could certainly see addressing like half of them or certain ones in a day-long retreat.
Sorry, got backwards on my mute again. So somewhat related question for Alyssa. Would you add any new topics for discussion or cull any of them at this point?
So I think so, yes. I think copyright is probably something that we would add at this point in time. Again, just for bringing it out into that shared space and pulling a lot of that individual knowledge out of folks into the team knowledge space. Things I would call from the list are the student attitudes towards AI, which we just didn't have enough information on, and same thing for the communicating with faculty and departments with AI. Those were ones that were, I think, in at the beginning when we were thinking about it, we thought we would learn a lot from each other, and what ultimately came out of it is we don't know. And so a meeting where 8 people say we don't know is not as useful as one would hope. Other things I think I would add at this point, especially if we were doing it right now in this time, would be something related to the use cases that we are seeing in our individual disciplines. Our unit now includes the School of Business, College of Engineering, College of Science, College of Health Sciences, and Corey College of Computer Science as well. And so we have a really wide range of both use cases, and then even stratified further within that, we have undergrad, grad, faculty, research staff in a variety of spaces. And I think it would be really interesting to see more of what people are doing there. I'd also love to expand on one meeting that we did that was around instructional materials, where we were thinking really aspirationally on what we would like to have and what would be useful. And that's one that I've thought about potentially repeating on almost a yearly or semesterly basis so that we're not necessarily always reinventing the wheel and can maybe build off of some of our existing instructional materials as well.
All right. Could you speak a little bit about whether you are or how you potentially would engage with and reference the ACRL AI competencies for academic library workers document?
So I think this came out as we were partway through the competency series in my group, and I remember thinking, "Oh, I wish this had been out before I put this all together." And then when I looked at it, realized that it had a much broader scope than the one for my group. And so I haven't looked back at it yet to see if there's anything that kind of got missed by our original series that I'd add in now. But I remember thinking that I was glad mine wasn't scoped really to the instruction work that we did because I think that made it more manageable for my group and they saw the more immediate relevance. So I haven't gone back to it yet to add anything in or check. But Alyssa, I don't know if you've checked it out for your team either.
I think we've had a handful of people who have looked to it. Looking more in depth at that could be a future meeting topic, especially based on how rich the discussion was that we had around the just AI policies at the institution and the questions, concerns, comments that we had related to that. But at the time, no, we didn't spend any time with it. I think now individual librarians have spent some time with it and it might impact and influence their individual instruction teaching, but not necessarily at the scale of the whole department.
All right, we have two more questions in here, and they are, I think, sort of related, so I will combine them. The first is specifically about collaborating with campus IT and whether they saw the library as a stakeholder. And then a more general question about if your work has led to the library being positioned differently on campus. And they said, on my campus, many units are trying to claim a leadership position vis-a-vis AI, and there's a lot of pressure to be very visible and active in this area to ensure the library is seen as relevant.
So I can jump in really quick and say that what the person with the second question has described was exactly the context that I think we were in this time last year, where we were seeing that pressure of being very visible and very active in these areas. I don't think either of our series like rose to that level of activity that would have been visible, but that is exactly the context that we were really sitting in. I do think that our work in these series has led to and helped us build things that have made us more visible in different ways. But this work directly, I don't think did that. It did create, for at least my team, some of that foundational work that has allowed us to build additional infrastructure in terms of AI support. Yeah, as for the campus IT collaboration, I don't think we did. It might have fallen at levels higher than Lindley or I sit, but
Yeah, I think when I mentioned a little bit earlier about those kind of workshop meetings that I was pulled into, ITS was definitely one of the partners there. But I think where we've actually seen more collaboration is with our teaching and learning center. So we've been in more active discussions with them about programming because they've been one of the driving forces on our campus on kind of educating faculty about AI use. And kind of agreeing with Alyssa's question, I don't know that either of the initiatives that we talked about today have really changed the library perspective, but I have certainly heard from some of our library administrators that things that we have put out, like the teaching statement and the tutorials, have really helped to show what the library is engaging with related to AI so that we have something to show and that have kind of opened other conversations for possibilities of future collaborations. And while it's not at the campus level, I think that AI has definitely changed my relationship with the education department with which I liaise because there had been faculty there who, prior to AI coming on the scene, been like, "Oh, I can handle everything for my students. You don't aren't really needed." And then all of a sudden, we're like, "The library should be leading AI initiatives. Please come talk with my students." And so it was a definite like about face. So now I can more regularly go to their faculty meetings and talk about what's happening and some of the things they should be aware of and what I can offer to them and to their students. And so I think that while it's not necessarily the result of either of these initiatives, the just general landscape of AI and all the changes we've seen have impacted some of those relationships.
yeah, I will just jump in really quickly to second what Lindley said there. Not again, not campus wide, but we have seen the same thing with liaisons who are confident and willing to talk about AI being invited and introduced in new faculty spaces than they had been because there is that information gap. And looking to talk to somebody who they trust, who is like we've talked about before, is not an AI evangelist necessarily, but just somebody they trust to offer a straightforward set of opinions or facts on whatever the questions are.
All right, very last call for any last questions. And hearing none, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you again to Alissa and Lindley for answering all of those questions, for the great presentation. It was really a pleasure to have you with us. Before we close out the session, I just want to point out the evaluation survey that is available for you to complete. I'm certain that the presenters would very much appreciate your feedback, and you can find a link to that evaluation in Schedule. It's labeled feedback survey, and it's directly above the session description. Thank you all for attending. We hope you enjoyed this presentation. Have an excellent rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow for day 2 of Calm. Thank you.